The cold was a living thing, seeping through the rents in his mail, into the very marrow of his bones. Mud, thick and cloying, tasting of iron and something older, fouler, was his bed, his shroud. Each breath rasped, a broken bellows puffing out a ghost of vapor into the bruised twilight. He remembered the shriek of steel, the wet, tearing sound of it finding flesh, the betrayal in eyes he'd once trusted above all others. Now, only the indifferent sky, a canvas of slate and bruised plum, stretched above. Rust flaked from his gauntlet as he tried to clench a fist, the leather beneath stiff with dried blood, theirs, it was all one stain now. The world had shrunk to this ditch, this agony, this relentless, grinding despair. His sword, his honor, his name, all lost in the churning morass of defeat. He was nothing, a broken vessel waiting for the tide of darkness to finally claim him. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches of a nearby thorn thicket, a lament for the already dead. And as the last sliver of sun bled from the horizon, a profound, soul-crushing loneliness settled in. Is this how it ends? A forgotten soldier in a forgotten war, food for crows. You've seen him at his lowest, haven't you? The knight, stripped bare of all but his pain. But what if this isn't the end? What if a different path, wilder and more uncertain than any battlefield, is about to open? Stay with us, subscribe, and see if a hand reaches out from the deepening shadows. Don't miss what happens next. A scent, sharp and clean amidst the rot, pricked at his fading senses. Pine needles, crushed herbs, damp earth. Then, a shadow fell across him, softer than the night's. He felt, rather than saw, a presence. Fingers, surprisingly gentle for their calloused touch, brushed mud from his brow, probed the gash at his temple. They moved with an economy, a practiced assessment that held no sentiment, only a quiet focus. He saw a flash of worn leather glove, the cuff of a dark, homespun sleeve. A woman. Her face was obscured by the hood of her cloak, but he sensed an agelessness, a stillness that was part of the ancient wood itself. She knelt, and the air around her seemed to hum with a subtle energy, like a held breath. There was no pity in her posture, no revulsion at the ruin he presented. He was a fallen tree, perhaps, or a wounded animal she was deciding whether to aid or pass by. He expected the final, merciful blow, or to be stripped of his remaining armor. Instead, an arm, wiry and strong, levered under his shoulders. A grunt, not of exertion, but of decision. She had made her choice. He was a dead weight, a burden, yet she maneuvered him with a grim determination, her breath misting in the chill. He was dragged, then half-lifted, his broken body protesting with fresh waves of agony. The world tilted and swam, a blur of darkness and the faint, earthy scent of her presence, a single, unexpected anchor in the overwhelming tide of his dissolution. He was being moved, uprooted from his grave of mud, though towards what, he could neither fathom nor fight. The journey was a tapestry woven from pain, fever dreams, and the rhythmic creak of what he eventually discerned was a rough-hewn cart. He lay amongst sacks of pungent roots and bundled herbs, the scent of them a constant, cloying companion. Days and nights blurred. Sometimes, through slitted, swollen eyelids, he saw her. A silhouette against a dawn sky, her movements fluid and purposeful as she navigated the unseen track. He'd see her pause, head tilted, listening to things he couldn't hear, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the subtle shift of wind through the high canopy of the great, brooding forest they traversed. Her hands, when he saw them, were always busy, checking snares that yielded a lean rabbit, gathering berries that stained her fingers deep purple, her face unreadable, her lips rarely moving to form words. Once, he woke to find her tracing symbols in the air around their small, smokeless fire, her expression intent, her eyes reflecting the embers with an unnerving intensity. He felt a prickle on his skin, a sense of ancient power, and then sank back into the fever. The land itself was a character in his delirium. Jagged peaks clawed at the sky, ancient forests swallowed the light, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf. It was a place that would break a lesser spirit, but she moved through it as if she were a part of its wild, untamed soul. He was utterly at her mercy, a broken sword she'd inexplicably picked up. The mystery of her deepened with every silent mile, a stark contrast to the brutal certainties of the life he'd known. The hermitage, when they finally reached it, was less a dwelling and more an extension of the wilderness itself. Tucked into the lee of a granite crag, its walls were of rough stone and timber, roofed with thick, living turf from which hardy mountain flowers bloomed in defiant splashes of color. Smoke, thin and blue, curled from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning peat and something else, something spicy and strange. Inside, it was dim, the air thick with the aroma of drying herbs hanging in dense bunches from the rafters. A single hearth provided warmth and light, its flames casting dancing shadows on the packed earth floor. There was a rough-spun blanket on a pallet of straw that became his bed. Her routine was as rhythmic and unyielding as the seasons. Dawn saw her tending a walled garden where peculiar plants grew in ordered chaos, their leaves shimmering with an unnatural luminescence in the twilight. She moved among them, whispering, her touch coaxing life from the stony soil. She communed with the forest creatures. A one-eyed raven would perch on her shoulder, and deer grazed fearlessly near her door. His recovery was slow, marked by the gradual return of strength and the dull ache of healing wounds. She set him to simple tasks, chopping wood, hauling water, grinding herbs with a heavy stone pestle. Words were scarce between them, but in the shared labor, in the quiet rhythm of their days, a silent understanding began to form. He learned the taste of bitter teas that eased his pain, the feel of rough-spun wool against his skin, the profound silence of a world untouched by the clamor of men. His armor lay in a shadowed corner, a forgotten relic of a life that felt centuries away. The mountain winter descended with a sudden, brutal ferocity, trapping them in its icy grip. A relentless wind shrieked around the hermitage, piling snowdrifts against the door. It was during this enforced confinement that the fever, which had lurked in the depths of his old wounds, returned with a vengeance. He burned and shivered, lost in a delirium of past battles and fresh horrors. Through the haze, she was a constant presence. He felt cool cloths on his forehead, tasted bitter, potent brews forced between his cracked lips. Her usual stoicism was pierced by a fierce, almost desperate concentration as she fought for his life. Her hands, usually so steady, sometimes trembled as she ground herbs or stoked the fire to a roaring blaze against the encroaching cold. In a moment of lucidity, he saw the deep lines of fatigue etched around her eyes, the smudge of soot on her cheek. "Why?" he rasped, the single word a monumental effort. She paused, her gaze, usually so distant, meeting his. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. "Life clings," she said, her voice rough, as if unused to such direct pronouncement. Even when it wishes not to, it wasn't an answer, not really, but it was more than she had ever offered. He saw not a mystic, not an enchantress, but a woman, weary and resolute, fighting a battle against a foe she could only try to forestall. A reluctant, fragile bond, forged in the crucible of his suffering and her unwavering care, began to thread itself between them, as tenacious and unexpected as the wildflowers on her roof. Will this bond be enough when new dangers arrive? You've seen them face the elements, but what about human threats? Stick around, because the fight for survival is far from over. Let us know in the comments if you think the night will ever truly heal. The thaw, when it came, was a muddy, messy affair, but it brought with it a sense of weary relief. The world outside their stone walls slowly unfroze, and with it, a threat more insidious than any storm. 3 men, cloaked and hard-eyed, emerged from the dripping forest one leaden afternoon. Their armor was ill-kept, their weapons honed by cruel use. They moved with the predatory confidence of wolves scenting weakness. They were not soldiers of any sigil he recognized, but rather the dregs of war, scavengers picking at the bones of a broken land. They'd seen the thin wisp of smoke from the hermitage chimney, a beacon in the desolation. He was outside, mending a fishing net with clumsy, still weak fingers, when they appeared at the edge of the clearing. His hand instinctively went to where his sword hilt should have been. Elara emerged from the doorway, silent as a shadow, her eyes, the color of moss agate, narrowed and cold. She held a small, curved sickle, usually for harvesting herbs, but in her grip, it looked like it could reap more than just plants. "Lost, are ye?" one of the men sneered, his gaze lingering on Elara with lewd appraisal, then flicking to Kaelen, dismissing him as a broken man. "Just looking for a bit of hospitality. Some food. Maybe some company for the cold nights." The air grew taut, the silence punctuated only by the drip of meltwater from the eaves. Kaelen pushed himself to his feet, positioning himself slightly in front of Elara, a pathetic shield, yet a shield nonetheless. "There's nothing for you here," he said, his voice hoarser than he intended, but firm. The leader chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "We'll be the judge of that." The leader took a step forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "The woman's got a tongue, or are you her keeper, cripple?" Kaelen felt a cold rage, a distant echo of the warrior he once was, but knew his current frailty. Before he could speak, Elara's voice cut through the tension, low and resonant, like the hum of the earth itself. "This is my place. You are not welcome." The man's eyes, small and piggy, narrowed. Brave words for a lone woman and her pet. He gestured to his companions. "Search the shack. I'll deal with these two." As the other two moved, Elara moved faster. It wasn't a physical rush, but a shift in the very air around her. The wind, moments before a gentle sigh, whipped suddenly through the clearing, carrying with it a flurry of dried leaves and sharp, stinging grit that made the men recoil, cursing. The ground beneath their feet seemed to writhe. Thorny vines, thick as a man's wrist, erupted from the thawing earth, coiling around the intruder's legs with terrifying speed, their thorns sinking deep. One man screamed as he was pulled off his feet, his sword clattering uselessly to the ground. The leader, stunned, drew his blade, turning on Elara. "Witch!" he roared, lunging. But the air before her shimmered, and his sword met not flesh, but a barrier of swirling shadows and crackling light that threw him back, yelping, his sword arm smoking. Kaelen watched, astounded. This was no mere gatherer of herbs. This was power, ancient and formidable, wielded not with incantations and dramatic gestures, but with the quiet, unyielding force of nature itself. The forest seemed to hold its breath, then exhale in a symphony of snapping roots and tearing cloth. It was over in moments, brutal and decisive. The silence that fell was heavier than the deepest snowdrift. The intruders lay groaning, ensnared by the living earth, their bravado shattered. Elara stood, her breath coming a little faster, the sickle still in her hand, but her eyes held a profound weariness. The vibrant energy that had crackled around her moments before now receded, leaving her looking almost fragile. She turned to Kaelen, her gaze searching, perhaps expecting fear or revulsion. He saw only a protector, fierce and absolute. He limped towards the nearest bound man, whose eyes were wide with terror, and picked up his dropped sword. It felt alien in his hand, yet familiar. He didn't look at Elara, but he felt her watching him. "They won't trouble anyone again," he said, his voice flat. He understood that her magic, while potent, was not without its cost, a drain on her own life force. He dragged the men, one by one, to the edge of the forest, the awakened vines reluctantly releasing their grip at a subtle gesture from her. He left them there, disarmed and terrified, with a clear understanding that to return would be to invite a far worse fate. When he returned to the hermitage, Elara was stirring a pot over the fire, the ordinary domesticity a stark contrast to the elemental fury he'd just witnessed. The air still hummed faintly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing not just the quiet woman who had saved him, but the formidable guardian of this wild place. The unspoken chasm between them had been bridged by shared peril and her terrifying, beautiful power. A new respect, deeper than gratitude, settled in his heart. Their sanctuary, once a place of quiet recuperation, was now a fortress, defended by more than just stone and timber. Spring breathed true life back into the mountains. With it, Elara began, in her quiet way, to teach him things beyond mere survival. It wasn't in lectures or pronouncements, but in shared moments, in the turn of a phrase, in the way she interacted with the living world. She showed him how to read the language of the wind in the rustling leaves, how to find the hidden edible roots by the faintest scent on the breeze, how the constellations wheeling overhead were not just cold, distant lights, but ancient storytellers. She never spoke of dreams or hope directly, those words were too grand, too easily broken. Instead, she would point to a tenacious flower pushing through a crack in a rock. "Life finds a way," she'd murmur, her voice soft as moss. Or she would share a fragment of an old song, a melody that spoke of resilience and the turning of seasons, its simple beauty a balm to his scarred soul. He began to notice the intricate patterns of frost on a windowpane, the iridescent sheen of a beetle's wing, the warmth of the sun on his face, small miracles he had long been blind to. The cynicism that had been his armor for so long began to crack, to fall away like old, dead skin. He found himself carving a small, wooden bird for her, his stiff fingers slowly regaining their dexterity, the act of creation a quiet joy. She accepted it with a rare, fleeting smile that touched her eyes, placing it on the rough mantelpiece where it seemed to gather the hearth light. The weight of his past, the ghosts of betrayal and loss, did not vanish, but they loosened their suffocating grip. He was learning not to forget, but to live alongside them, to find a measure of peace in the wild solitude, a nascent purpose in the rhythm of their shared existence. The seasons turned, a slow, steady wheel. The hermitage, once a temporary refuge, became home. Kaelen's strength returned, not just the physical prowess of a knight, but an inner resilience, a quiet fortitude that mirrored Elara's own. The jaded warrior was still there, a shadow in his eyes sometimes, but now tempered with a new light, a capacity for wonder he thought long dead. He learned the subtle cadence of her magic, the hum of energy that preceded its use, the faint scent of ozone or blooming night flowers that sometimes clung to her. He became her silent guardian in turn, his recovered skills with a hunting bow providing meat for their table, his watchful presence a deterrent to any stray wanderers. Their devotion was not spoken in flowery vows, but lived in every shared task, every silent understanding, every glance that conveyed more than words ever could. It was in the way she mended his worn tunic with unexpectedly neat stitches, the way he ensured the woodpile was always high before the first snows. He watched her one evening, outlined against the fiery sunset, her hands gentle as she tended a wounded fox cub they'd found. Her face, usually so guarded, held a profound tenderness. And in that moment, he understood. She hadn't just taught him to survive, she had taught him to feel again, to connect, to believe in the persistent, stubborn beauty of life. The fierce devotion that bloomed between them was as wild and resilient as the mountain landscape they called home, a quiet testament to the grace found in shared hardship and the unexpected sanctuary of a hermit's welcome. The future was unwritten, a path winding into the mists of the high peaks, but they would walk it together, two solitary souls who had found, in each other, a reason to dream.